you have to invest in making that technology yours. Your security in its particular moment is literally a unique snowflake. There is no other organization that has your exact mix of people and technology and requirements at that moment, and it's always changing. And so if you can't invest to make a tool yours, well, there's a reason that 75% of tools are either not installed or improperly configured because you haven't invested to make it yours. And that's what you need to do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm your host, Joe Carson, Chief Security Scientist from Delinea, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm really excited about today's episode. As always, we try to find really entertaining, really fantastic, and amazing, knowledgeable guests. And we definitely have one here for you today. So I'm going to pass it over to Bryson to introduce yourself. And definitely, I've seen you in fantastic costumes and outfits and over the years. And definitely the one today is fantastic. So you're always about unicorns. So Bryson, over to you to introduce yourself, some things about your background, how you get into the industry, and what things you enjoy doing.
Yeah, I can't speak to knowledgeable, but I'll let the audience be a judge after
I would
the next
disagree.
30 to 40 minutes goes by, but I will be entertaining. I promise that. Today is the summer unicorn because I just moved to Florida and it's warm. I'm required by law to brag about the weather and be obnoxious about it. As I told you, I get points on my license if I don't. Me, former Army officer, did time in the intelligence community. 10 years ago, started my own company named GRIMM, which was my nickname in the IC. GRIMM is still around. It is, I'd like to say a classic pen testing company, but when I think of classic pen testing, I think most folks go to web app and network penetration testing, whereas GRIMM does that and more. Literally try to stump us with the technology that we have not done security research on. I don't know what it would be at this point. We've done it. The story jumps to the future, the present. You got me off on the Estonian and no future. I'm mixing up my English is technically not my first language.
That's what people ask me. I was like, oh, people like go, it's like English is pretty good for your second language, and then I get sometimes embarrassed to go, well, actually, technically, it is my first language. Well, being from Belfast, it does get
Yeah,
complicated.
well,
English isn't,
I think you just summed up the Irish. It's your first language, but it sounds like a second.
Exactly.
2016, Target came to me, asked me to build them a tool. I was kind of surprised that there wasn't anything already on the market for that. And I went back to him and said, well, what if I built you a platform of unlimited threat emulation? You could scale it to your scope, your risk appetite, your technical ability, whatever you want. And most importantly, you will never be beholden to a third party again. Because particularly with the time I've seen in the DoD and the intelligence community, we see the military industrial complex reach up and grab around the throat and be like, it's going to be this way forever. Good luck. And I didn't want them to be that way. They thought that was great. I thought that was great. Co-developed with them for 2.5 years. Realized I knew absolutely nothing about commercial software sales and development. So at the end of 2018, we spun SCYTHE out of GRIMM with the help of Ron Gula from Tenable, Dmitry Alperovich from CrowdStrike, and then Paladin Capital was the other big VC with us. So I've now learned a lot about venture capital and commercial software sales and development and all of those pieces. The gaps between everybody talks about how to raise money, and then it's a bunch of D and E round or IPO founders later who all brag about how smart and successful they were. Just, it's so easy, just do that. Nobody ever talks about the middle, about how much it sucks and it's really hard. And that's where I'm at. I co-founded a nonprofit, a 501c3, because I don't apparently have enough free time, called the ICS Village with Tom Van Norman. You can catch us. We have been perennial parts of DEF CON and the RSA conference. And then we do a number of other conferences throughout the year, including our 6th annual Hack the Capitol, which takes place in Washington, D.C. So we'll have members of Congress. We have a couple of agency directors, and then just tons of folks throughout industry and government in different parts, all come together for 2 days in McLean, Virginia, May 10th and 11th. That's Hack the Capitol, our 6th one. I'm on the board of the Army Cyber Institute. Just announced today, I'm now a fellow at the CISA Control Systems. I don't remember what it is, but I probably should learn how to pronounce the
You
organization.
should probably.
Yeah, I know it is CISA because it's C squared AI, and that's with Banked and Derek
Hmm,
Harp. Um, I'm also a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. I think that's
hmm.
most of the things I do, and I'm probably affiliated with things that I don't remember and can't pronounce the name. So whatever.
And you love to travel and good food in
I
the wine.
don't necessarily love to
Yeah.
travel. I live on airplanes because it's the job, not because I love to be
Yeah.
in, the middle row, 17B,
Hmm.
going, well, this
Oh,
is great. Aren't
like
I
the
executive
back of
platinum?
the
Should I
back
be
of the
upgraded?
plane.
Nope. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for myself as well, I travel quite often, and it gets to the point where it's like people, oh, it's a luxury thing. You're really enjoying it. It's like what? One thing is people that very few people know that actually I'm afraid of flying in heights.
I did not know you were afraid of flying. So,
Yes,
afraid of
it was.
heights, that's very common, but being a
Yeah,
frequent flyer to be afraid to fly, that's something else, mister.
see, it happened. It was before that. Years ago, I was perfectly fine, but then I had an event. Actually, two events in my time that were quite significant. One was where the plane was running out of fuel, and we had to make an emergency landing in, I think it was Delaware, if I remember, which wasn't an international airport. And this is going back. This is like maybe about early 2000s. And when we came down, there was really bad crosswinds, and we had to land. So the pilot just basically crashed us into as hard as possible into the ground, where the wing even hit the ground and the grass went flying up. All the luggage came out of the top. And for that point, for me, I got a bit iffy about flying. It was a bit kind of, I started getting on edge, especially when turbulence and takeoff and landing. So yeah, so I face my fears quite often. And
Well, Joe, so I've had worse. I have been on a plane that has been hijacked, Frankfurt
oh,
to I forget where we were going. I think Dulles, and we did an emergency landing in Lockerbie, Scotland, for the negotiations. And then when I was redeploying back from the Middle East after 9/11, um, uh, our plane, we're up in the air for like maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then the plane goes, oh, and we there's a long story to how long we'd been stranded. And of course, you can imagine where we were. It had already been lots of terrible, sucky things. And we're just like, please get us out of here. And this plane just like goes, oh, and I'm not making this up either. The pilot comes on the intercom. He's like, if you look out over the left wing, you'll see us dumping fuel over the pyramids. We had catastrophic engine failure, and an engine had
ouch.
actually basically blown up in the air.
So for the audience, in this world where when we travel a lot of things happen. Even to one additional to your fuel one, I actually maybe about 5 years ago, I actually wrote a was a really good LinkedIn blog that I wrote about it. Was when the plane actually had a fire in the fuselage. We just took off, and all of a sudden, the back of the plane was, from the back tail of the plane started getting smoke coming in, and we had to make an emergency landing. And of course, at that point, you can't dump fuel.
Nope, because it'll
So
catch
we came
fire.
in pretty. We did a 30,000 down to the ground, down to the ground within about 2 minutes, and a heavy landing with a fire brigade and stuff. So for me, yeah, I'm very tense on planes. So you don't want to be sitting next to me because I'm the one sitting with hands gripping as hard as possible on the seats.
Just
So
like cybersecurity, I think we all have this perpetual anxiety, and
yes, we
I
do.
embrace it with more of a nihilistic view of what's going to happen is going to happen. And just like on a plane in cybersecurity, everybody is in the same position you are in. Whatever is going to happen is
Absolutely.
going to happen to all of us.
Absolutely. So getting it from when you started getting into you started getting into cybersecurity, what was kind of the first kind of experiences? What was it like? Kind of what was the threats at the time? what things were you interested in? What was the areas of interest?
Well, I mean, first of all, at our age, I mean, we were
Yeah,
around and doing this stuff before cybersecurity was a thing.
even
It wasn't
what it
called
was a word.
cybersecurity. It was
It was
called, hey, the Melissa
security.
virus happened, run around with a CD-ROM and plug it into everything that will take it. Like that was it.
Mm,
That is one of the going back to that angst that
uh-huh.
I share is the perspective of how young this industry is. Until
Yep,
2000, firewalls were not common.
yep,
Think about that. The concept of your network is different from my network is 20 years old. I love bringing up Target because Target in 2012 was the bellwether for industry taking this
mhm,
seriously. Until that, the C suite didn't even, cybersecurity, never heard of it, don't
yeah.
care, nerd.
Didn't even have anyone who was doing the job.
Yeah, we had AVs and we had firewalls. We're good.
Mm,
That's it. And it was in 2013 when the results of that happened that the modern cybersecurity ecosystem became what it is. All of the products, all of the money that's been pouring into it is effectively 10 years old. So going back, I mean, my getting into it would be, I guess, like the most common hacker origin story, which is when I was the threat, right? I was figuring out how to get access to anything I wasn't supposed to. I was really motivated to take the DRM off of games and modify the games to make them my way because you can only play Civilizations so many ways before at some point. Why don't I start creating my own units and doing my own things like that? Um, I think where it really exploded for me was in high school because I found high school boring, and my sophomore year we were given graphing calculators, and now I had my own processor with its own limited, I think it was basic programming language
oh,
on the
basic
thing.
language.
So I just
Oh,
started making video games on my calculator. Like I
mhm.
made Street Fighter, I made elaborate role playing games, and it was academic, so I could be any class just making video games, and I'd be left alone for the most part. I actually took that same skill set into college, and there'd be instructors who would test me a time or two because I don't look like I'm paying attention, and they'd ask me a question and I'd answer it, and they'd be like, they do that a few times, and they realize, okay, whatever he's doing, he's not disruptive, and he's kind of paying attention in his way, so we're all good.
No, I think when we've spoken previously, I always find that we've had very similar paths because I actually started the same way. That I was all about basically getting I didn't have access to the coolest and greatest games, so I always tried to find ways in order to gain access to them to copy them. I spent a lot of time even in basic was typing programs. I had to wait for the magazine every month and then spend hours of my time typing in the program in basic ultimately to find out that there was some typo in the magazine that you'd had to wait for the 2 3 months later with them to do a reissue and say, oh, remember in line 560 whatever that there was a missing like was it a quote or something and just like oh. And that for me was a kind of gaming and getting around that even at school. One of the things I was able to do was I made a ton of money because I knew where the IT team kept the passwords. So every time we had Apple Classics at the time, and I basically would go around all the computers at the start of class, and I would charge people to put games on them. So they would pay me. I was the gaming admin, going around and reinstalling the games, and then in the evening, the IT guys would be like, "Who installed all these games?" And they'd go and remove them all. So the next day, I would go and recharge them all to install them back on again. And that was paying for my gaming hobby in the evenings, going to be able to pay for the cartridges and stuff. So and definitely it was always finding out. So the point is, I always say hacking is a curiosity. It's a mindset, and I think from a very young age, just like yourself, is that we get into this curiosity about what things we can we do either to gain access or to gain knowledge or to do the things that we're passionate about, whether it being gaming or whether it being just ripping things apart and understanding about how it works. And that's why I think I always hate the term that in the media they use hacking as a very malicious activity, but it's not. It's something that we're just curious people that want to know how things work. And there's different motives. I think it comes down to the misinterpretation of motive sometimes into what it is we're really trying to do, or how we're using that skill, and is it really is it for good or for malicious purposes, and sometimes I think that always gets lost in some of the narrative as well.
I'll be honest. So I'm an advocate for an organization called Hacking is Not a Crime.
Yep.
and that's part of the that's a lot of what we've been pushing, has been trying to change that narrative. But I almost feel like we've reached a point that I'm not as worried about that anymore.
Mhm.
The concerns about the FBI breaking down your door to, uh, pummel you with CFAA. I just, when you look at the conversations and the fact that cybersecurity is even mentioned by the White House, the level of leadership and talent at CISA, at the National Cybersecurity Directorate, which is now a thing, um, the fact that the funding is there, the last 10 years, when you look at Bug Crowd and HackerOne and Synac and all of the democratization of penetration testing with bug bounties, where companies are now saying, hey, we want to invite these folks with a limited scope to do these kinds of things. I think we're past that, where it's there's a not that there's a negative perception to it, but that there are negative consequences to that being in the narrative. So I'm not as worried about that piece anymore. I still have the I think where we all do, which is recognizing where cybersecurity is in the risk matrix of any
Yep.
person or organization. And I always point it out, like from a Maslow's hierarchy, the average person does not care about cybersecurity. Why would they? When they have to worry about eating and drinking and staying alive and staying married or getting to a job on time and all of these other things. And then somewhere maybe 30 or 40th down the list is cybersecurity. And we have the same challenge with organizations. And going that back to where hacking really was initially a countercultural approach, it was driven by passion and curiosity. Well, now it's tied to money, and that passion and curiosity is no longer enough. We have to be driving business and business driven results with what we are bringing from security. And so offensive
Absolutely.
security is not there to be, can I continue to find the edge of what's possible? It's what's most relevant to the business and how do I assure that and show that. It's more
Mhm.
communication, reporting, and organizational
Yeah.
management.
Yeah, it definitely always reminds me of years ago was when I was doing a pen test in a power station, and ultimately the goal at the time, this 2015, 2016, was to show the risks, but from a security perspective, not from a business perspective. And it was the CFO and CEO, after me and the CISO, we sat down, we showed them, we went through all this FUD and fear and scare tactics, which you typically did back then, was, unpatched systems and default credentials and, access can go here. And we had this whole list of things and we scared them because ultimately the goal the CISO wanted was to get budget. They wanted more money to pay for more security solutions in order to do the things that they wanted to do. But ultimately, the CFO and CEO sat down and said, "Hey, you scared us and great presentation, but you didn't say any of the things that we understand. You didn't speak our language. You didn't show us about return on investment. How is it making the business better? How is it helping employees?" And that was my turning point for me in my whole outlook and how I looked at things was that my job that was a defining moment where I thought my job was security, but I realized that it's actually security is the skill and technique and how I apply things. But risk is ultimately what my job was. It was to listen to people and understand about what their job is and how they actually do their job, and to the point where what things I can do to help them to make their lives better, but without putting security as a blocking part, as an enforcer, but what things I can do to point them in the right direction and actually make security better than their previous experience of what they were doing before without security was. So it was the realization that it's all about risk. And everything we had to do, that to your point, is it's all about business outcomes. How the what we do with this technique or this automation or this solution or these security or penetration testing or blue team, purple, however, all of those things, how does it make a difference to the business? How does it help them be successful? How does it help the employee? To your point, how does it help them eat healthier or get to work on time or to how does it better their life? How does it make them much more secure socially? And I get worried because one of the things that even just last week, I play football, so soccer for the American audience. So um, sometimes not very well. I try my best. I do, I do get injured quite often these days, which takes a lot longer to heal, unfortunately. But
That's called
um,
getting old, Joe.
I know. Everyone keeps telling me, but I will continue to do it as long as I can. But I was sitting with the team, the team that I was playing with, and I was asking them about the whole TikTok issue. And I was asking them about getting into, what about, their kids are all using TikTok, and they were asking, they're saying, to be honest, the kids are at this point where they don't care. And this is the point where you're saying is that, people don't really, it's not their forefront, and it's not the things that they really worry about, to the point where the kids, I'm going to get worried, the next generation of kids coming in, that they like, oh, why do I care? What, I'm actually being able to communicate with friends. I can share things. Things are funny. They're enjoying, and to the point where, how do we make it where they can actually get where security can be in the background, or that they can, get it for organizations as well, to the point where it will work for them. It will help them be better. Because I get worried to the point where we're in this crossroads of people don't care at all.
I don't think it's that they don't care. I mean, down to the individual person. One, I think there's a nihilism. I mean, when's
Mhm.
the last time your credit card's been stolen? It gets stolen all
Yeah,
the time, but
yeah,
we're protected.
wins a lot.
So, like,
Yeah,
that's the most common access we have as individuals to being breached. And it's like, meh, it's going to happen. I'm good. I
mhm,
mean, there's nothing I can do. It's this amorphous thing that happens and it
yeah,
strikes, and Cthulhu reaches its tentacle through and I'm taken. And at the organization, I think everybody gets, again, going back to the target as the canary in the coal mine, everyone gets it at an organization, but where do I start? What do I do? And it's not like I don't have the resources immediately available as a small and medium sized business. This is where I've really pointed the finger for federal government, and CISA has such a tough job because, again, going back to the youth of all of this, I mean, CISA for the United States is 4 years old,
yeah,
right? Chris Krebs, now Jen Easterly, are responsible for building this thing almost from like nothing. I mean, it was a department before, it had some folks, but the scope of the requirement is gargantuan. And where do you get the resources? We all are short on resources, and government's supposed to do that. And so I point the finger is, well, one, all critical infrastructure can't be critical. We need to create categories of criticality and consequence so that we can start to narrow the problem. And then where can government, being a central function, um, provide the most help to that? And my recommendation has been we need some kind of like a solutions catalog where if I don't need to threaten you with paper and sticks because you're not going to read the paper. You can't even access it. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's like, oh, a CVE. I don't know. Or I need to be compliant with what? How? Instead, the carrots of like opt into this program and we'll do this stuff for you. We will provide these configurations. We will maintain this stuff. We'll do all this threat intelligence. Don't worry about what threat intelligence is. We got it, right?
right,
That's the
yeah.
level we need to get to.
The shared security model. It's
Shared
it's
security
really where,
model.
yeah,
And
it's for it's one of the things. So it reminds me of one thing. I did. It was for a large transportation company. It was the same thing. Same. We went in and we did security in the silos, and ultimately we found that basically everything was, the risks were everywhere. It was all over the place. And what we went to, we tried to then put in enforcement. We tried to put security policies and enforce in place, but the employees were just finding ways around them. We were actually creating friction. We were creating lots of problems between the employees and security by trying to do better security. And ultimately, I remember we were sitting with a bunch of kids. To give the background is that it was bring your kid to work day, right? So all these kids sitting around in one of the office meeting rooms, and we were running. We were actually getting to the point where we didn't know what to do. And somebody came up with the idea and says, why don't we ask the kids? They might have a better solution than us, as a joke. And we thought, you know what? Let's go ask the kids. So we got permission to go and basically sit with the kids for about an hour. And we went through and we asked them about, how did they see things? And one of the things was that if we were to send, communication to you, we were doing it through email and internet sites and so forth, and policies and getting people to sign these things. And the kids were like, why don't you put it in cartoons? Because then it will make more sense to me. You can, because we're used to reading comics, and that will basically tell us a story rather than just giving loads of text. And we're just like, oh, that's really cool. And we never thought about that. Exactly. And the next point was like, how do we pictures is tells it makes a big difference. How do we actually get to the point where how do we communicate it? Because email wasn't working, internet site wasn't working, it wasn't the best way. And they said, was it, we're all humans. We all need to go to the bathroom at least once a day. So why don't you put it in the back of the bathroom door? And it was amazing that to that point was the kids taught us more than what we've been doing in 6 months. 6 months we've been trying to do that, and the kids basically in 1 hour give us a solution that was really effective. And then the next thing we realized was that it was the point where, to the social security sphere, is that the organization then decided that they were not just going to give security to the device that the employees they were giving to employees, but they actually said that security starts at home because of that whole the kids at home, and how do we make the kids more safe. That they said that we will give, actually, in the home, all the security solutions that they had in the office, they would expand it to the actual employee's home, so that they can actually benefit from them. And they realized that we're only secure as the social sphere we have around us. And the more we can bring people into that social sphere of security, the more we can actually make our social sphere around us much more protected, much more resilient. So I really love the shared security model, because it allows you to opt in and benefit from things that you may have not had access in the past to. It may provide you solutions that might be sometimes out of your reach and resources. So for me, absolutely, I think that's one of the ways we can definitely make, at least, the small medium businesses being able to get the protection that the large organizations sometimes have the luxury of.
The reality of the interconnected supply chain is you're in the same boat whether you realize it or not. You're in the same plane whether you know it or not.
Exactly. At some point in time, we're going to have problems, and we all want to make sure that we all work together to solve those. So, but one of the things is that I think one of the important things you mentioned was around the CISA and stuff, and I think that was it for me when Chris Krebs took over and started creating and became much more proactive, much more providing best practices, much more sharing of information. And that was amazing. It was the first time where I felt like government was actually starting to really care and start doing more proactive communications, and sharing intelligence, sharing threats, and showing best practices. And to the point you were just talking about, the hack the
Heck, the
what's the
capital.
hack the capital. How important do you find it is to collaborate and to share between governments, companies, and researchers and so? How important is all of that collaboration? How do you find it? Is it working today? Can we do better? And what things? Where's the direction going?
So I'm not going to be, yet the 10 millionth time anybody has heard information sharing is the answer. I will note this. Our purpose with Hack the Capital was realizing that industrial control systems and
Mm,
critical infrastructure are not a well understood thing, because it's
mm,
not the kind of thing where I can just get a PLC on my desk, whereas it's easy for me to walk
yeah,
over to a store and get a laptop. So everybody sort of gets that.
yeah,
And then the second part was more about the relationship building. Uh,
mhm,
these staffers, these folks have to build actual policy and legislation, which turns out is really hard to do. And the most common access point for help in the Washington D.C. area are the K Street lobbyists, who have an agenda that they get paid for. So, what better way of trying to get directly to, I'm not prescribing that one person or the other person or researcher or research in the community is the answer, so much as giving a democratic access to you decide whom you like for whatever reasons, and that they can be there. And I've always found, while security researchers may not understand policy and legislation well, they are for the most part really willing to help and to educate, and that was the big thing. That being said, to your broader question, I think information sharing is still abysmal in this space for lots of reasons. For the really, really juicy stuff, well, that's all classified, so good luck. And also, I don't think it's what drives most of the intelligence we see. I think the gray space is primarily being dominated by commercial. Google and Microsoft have done tons on their own to fight the fight at the edge.
yeah.
Um, and so when I mean, again, and then yeah, actually, let's pivot to this and why I think threat intelligence is failing us. So threat intelligence is about $10 billion
Mhm,
annually as a global industry. Almost all of that is ephemeral indicators of compromise.
mhm,
I get bad hash, bad domain, bad IP address. And when you start to break down the process for that, there's a reason why that is. And I'm not criticizing
mhm,
EDRs and AVs and MDRs and all of that. There's a reason why we are in the ecosystem that feeds the
mhm,
Groundhog Day we're in cybersecurity. I learned yesterday to get through today and rediscover tomorrow. And so when you look at what it takes to produce that indicator of compromise that's
Mhm.
machine readable, which is where you, the customer, love it because I don't have to think about it to automatically employ it in my environment. Well, neither does the attacker. But it's 6 months ago, an analyst
Mhm.
picked up something, correlated it to multiple campaigns, determined that that is in fact, a positive
Mhm.
signal. There's not a false positive in here, and so that, I mean, that's 6 months of work to get to that point to then be the table stakes for Groundhog's Day. And
Yep.
I mean, any EDR could be put into a configuration setting that would stop any attack. Your computer just wouldn't be usable. And
Yeah.
that's
A good to point.
the hard part, right? This is what I get asked
Yeah.
all the time, which vendor do I like? And what I would say is there's two qualities to choosing a vendor.
Mhm.
The first, trust.
Yep.
Whatever I think I'm being sold, whatever I am being sold, and I actually think most salespeople are not trying to screw you. Most salespeople are really trying to do a win for you. They just don't necessarily know everything and they don't know your environment. And so, assuming that we take the bad apples out and the trust part is the salesperson makes the sale, it's mostly what I think it is, and there's going to be something that isn't what I need it to be. Can I trust that that vendor will be there to help me when that happens? Then the second part is the part I never see anybody talk about. You have to invest in making that technology yours. Your security in its particular moment is literally a unique snowflake. There is no other organization that has your exact mix of people and technology and requirements at that moment, and it's always changing. And so, if you can't invest to make a tool yours, well, there's a reason that 75% of tools are either not installed or improperly configured because
Shelfware.
you haven't invested to make it yours. And that's what you need to do. And that, interestingly or ironically, is what I found myself starting from offensive security. And now is mostly what I do with Scythe is that's essentially all we do is security is defined by the threat and the assurance and the tuning, the detection engineering, the making the tool yours is being able to drive a functional signal reliably at scale through an environment so you can tailor all of your components around that. And it's not just the technical components because, I mean, when you break that down into it, it starts with visibility. Visibility is, can I see something on a host? Can I see something on a network? Then can I have proper alerting where that goes to somewhere? Like, does my SIM actually collect that stuff? Then we get to the human part of response, which is where does an alert happen to a person? And that's where we have dwell time to detection time to the actual human response. And the response is, am I resourced properly? Are we trained properly? Are the tools even correlated correctly to our people? If you're not looking at that stuff, you're missing how you're actually defending yourself because you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. And that's where you're really getting into a point where I couldn't agree more is that you're moving from a static security kind of approach where you're just basically hoping that everything you put in place today is going to protect everything tomorrow. And you're moving to much more, if you start doing more interoperability, and at your point, is you don't invest in products, you invest in basically solutions. And that doesn't mean just putting something in software in place and hope that it's going to catch everything.
Yep.
You actually have to invest in people. You have to invest in actually make sure that you understand how it applies to your business, how the people and connecting them together to your existing sensors and existing information logs and seams and so forth. So what I will say is it's almost like when you get into it, interoperability is a key important, but getting towards security is almost like an orchestra, like a symphony, all working together, all basically in tune. And you've got a conductor who understands what's happening and what's coming, and ultimately getting to a point where that it becomes more dynamic, more adaptive. It's flexible. It's almost like a living organism in the business, and you can tune it as your business changes and as the threats change. So we really got to get away from the static approach, hoping that, to your point, by putting an AV in place or an EDR and just leaving it and hoping that the default configuration is going to do and protect your business is not going to happen. And definitely, a lot of, we talk a lot about security by design, but unfortunately, we don't have security by default. And a lot of those solutions you put in place, a lot of the really cool stuff is turned off because, to your point, it makes the devices become unusable. Because when you put too much on, that the user can't do the things that they need to do in order to make their job. So a lot of times it's off, and you have to practically go and understand about what those things do, what those configurations enable, and how to get the right balance, how to fine tune it. So I can agree more. You need to, it's not just putting a product in place; it's investing in on ideas. It's investing in resiliency of your business, because ultimately that's the measurement that we should be looking at. How resilient are we making an organization that when disaster does happen, that you can continue and survive post incident?
Yeah, that's where I'm hoping this all goes, and I haven't seen really any organization get there yet, but it's um, controls validation is part of GRC, and so it's
Yep.
existential, but we know that's not security.
Mhm.
It's
Oh, it's
so
it's
being able to simplify and make that more efficient to do that, that's great. But where security comes in is the time aspect of this, because there is a
mhm.
direct correlation to dwell time and
Yep.
activity for a threat and the impact on your business. Direct
Yep.
correlation. The longer they're there, the more they get to do, the more bad things are going to happen to you. Very intuitive, right? But nobody is focusing and nobody can measure on that time.
Mhm.
That's one of the differentiations we see in our tool is we can do that, but most folks aren't there yet from a maturity
Mhm.
perspective, right? Because tools don't solve problems. Tools
Yep.
help bridge divides.
Correct.
You can't, my tool can't just, you can't just point it and be like, oh, well, problem solved. Like, it's not going to work. You have to have the
Mhm.
maturity, the process, the
Mhm.
commitment to saying, well, this is how we're going to use it in this thing. And here's the neatest part that I think really, it's funny. So I came up with this idea back in 2017, and I was
Mhm.
told, do not say that out loud because no one's ever going to buy it because of that. And it's the fact that you can be courageous enough to actually cut tools out of your portfolio.
Absolutely.
But that, no, it's not absolutely. Nobody does that
No,
because no CISO is incentivized to cut, right? I get forced to cut, but there is no way I'm going to
no.
my company and going like, you know what? I figured out how to save 13% on my budget because we don't need these tools because I know we don't need these tools. Instead,
Mm.
it's breach happens. Well, that tool would have caught it. You're fired, right?
Yeah.
So the courage to do that means you better have the data to drive that piece. And that's that I was told back when I
Mhm.
realized my tool could do that. Do not lead with that. But I think now with things like several banks failing in the United
Mm.
States
No.
to all of the economic uncertainty in the tech world in the last year, and we've started to see yet another one of the hiccups before. Of course, I'm
Mhm.
sure we'll J curve again before another
Yeah.
hiccup. That money is not forever. It does not grow on trees. So we do have to behave like the rest of the business that we look so hard to do.
Absolutely.
Right? Why can't we
No.
have metrics like finance? Well, we're still trying to figure that out. Why can't we, actually be intelligent about our spend? Well, we're still trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
We can be. We can do that. We can be equals with the business.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think I've seen it in some instances. It's not common. It's not frequent. I have seen some CISOs and security leaders looking. Even my job years ago in the data center was infrastructure tools, and my job was to reduce the tool set as much as I possibly can, to consolidate, to remove things that were not adding value, or to find other ways of doing things. That was one of my roles, and that was a complicated time when HP acquired Compaq. We incurred a lot of duplication of tools. So to go through and try to find what the way forward. You're absolutely right that not all organizations are taking that approach. They're not looking at, can I get rid of firewalls, or can I go and reduce VPNs and use something else? Can I, they're always accumulating and not really looking at what is that continuous value. And I learned actually one of the valuable lessons here in Estonia was they actually put in a 7-year life cycle. To all systems had to be reviewed every 7 years in order to be reevaluated whether they have continuous, purpose and value. I think businesses should always take that same, maybe 7 years is a bit longer. Maybe they can do it shorter for businesses. That's a government to do that is more complicated. But I find that absolutely you always have to question what the value is and is there a better way of doing things. I have seen some organizations being brave enough to go and take that, that step to the point where you can use your personal device, but we'll find a way in order to provide the same security level without actually having AV running on it, and looking at different where the protection starts and stops. So I think it's a progression. I do agree with you that we do have to start making those harder decisions to consolidate to because the problem. I think one of the things is the more tools you have, the less effective you become, the less efficiency or the more challenging it is to get visibility. How many resources would you need to be able to even maintaining those?
Well,
So
that's right, investment, right? That ties into I have to
yeah,
invest. The more things I have to maintain, the more I have to invest. But I think
mm,
it's that second part, the maintenance, that I really take the other talking heads to task on, right? Oh, just segment, problem solved. Oh, zero trust, no problem, right? And the maintenance of those things is what's so hard about them, right? I mean, zero
right.
trust, great idea. Completely agree with it. I mean, I take an assume compromise and assume breach perspective. Zero trust says take assume breach and apply it everywhere. You're right. Absolutely. It's why I always win. But when you look at the configuration management to set it up at the level of users, assets, and data, okay. And again, a tool can't solve that for me. A tool can make
Right.
it easier, but that's what's so hard about these things. Same thing with segmentation. It's like, well, I have to do it in such a way that I'm not breaking operations, and then I have to maintain it.
It's the maintenance is the biggest overhead in security, is just keeping the lights on, and that's I think
Nobody
when you
wants to
look
say
back,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Nobody wants to admit that.
it's I mean, even back, years ago, we used to look at, I think it was 20% was the actually cost of the product. 80% was the cost to kind of basically implement and maintain it. And a lot of that, the difference is sometimes it historically it came out of capital and operational expenditure, so it was very different financial buckets, and that's why some organizations were probably able to get away with it, because the capital expenditure, products were going in there, operational was over here. But now, as more organizations are moving to more SaaS and more subscription based, that maintenance is coming a lot more to the visibility, because it's all coming out of the same bucket now. It's all accumulating, and you're getting much more central visibility. So I think absolutely is that we have to start looking at that into, the cost of security cannot be more than the profit of the business. And we have to get into the point where, it's all about what's the business willing to accept, what's the risk they're willing to accept. And of course, they can offset it with insurance, they can offset it with people, they can offset it with, segregation, they can offset it with, financial coverage, and cyber captives, whatever it might be. But ultimately, it's about finding the right balance.
Yes.
So, so, but any final, what's any final words of wisdom? What do you think? What would organizations be the first step they should take, or what should people in the episode listening in? What's some of the things that they can do right now that would get them on the path to consolidation, or taking those brave steps, to really taking the hard, kind of decision, and the tough decisions sometimes.
Yeah. So configuration management is 80% of security. And so, okay,
Mhm,
great. Thanks. That's helpful. I'm still not going to get a CMDB. Brilliant idea. Also segment and zero trust, right? Thank you for talking head that you just criticized. But here's what you can do that's not as, that's a lower lift. So Sunil Yu, he just published a book last year called The Cyber Defense Matrix. And in 2017 at RSA, he released the concept as a
mhm,
talk. And what he did is he took the 5 phases of the NIST CSF:
mhm,
identify, what do I got? Protect, how do I prevent access? Detect, respond, and recover. And then
mhm,
he mapped them on the y-axis to the different categories of assets and users. And what you should do as a security organization is just take the 5-10 minute paper exercise of going, what do I got against what works in these spaces? Immediately, you'll identify overlap and you'll identify if you have a gap. Then the second part is operational visibility. So that's telling me what I got, what's the structure. Now operational visibility. What is my visibility on what's there and what's happening there? And this is where it's hard for security, because what an attacker does is masquerade like normal things. I try to look like a normal user on a normal host doing normal traffic. I don't jump in and bring some 007 triple encoded protocol, because that's going to stick out. That's not what you use. I use what you got. And so visibility is driving that functional signal in that space to go, what's my visibility on what I've got against what that might look like? And where I see people failing in doing that. I always start with free. Atomic Red Team has built a great free tool, but here's what you're missing. So you've heard MITRE ATT&CK, and Joe, I'm surprised you didn't make us say it earlier, because I'm pretty sure we get fined by MITRE if we don't say it. Is how MITRE ATT&CK is being abused on this concept. Okay,
mhm,
MITRE ATT&CK is like a periodic table of elements that describes all of the physical world that could exist for attacks. Now, that's not completely true because
Mm.
there are attacks and techniques that are in it, but
Yep.
just as a concept, that's what it is. And what Atomic Red Team does, which is a good starting point, but this is where it's being abused, not necessarily Atomic Red Team, but the idea of how MITRE is being abused is if it's a periodic table of elements, I'm testing hydrogen and then I'm
Mhm.
testing oxygen. Well, you're going to build very simple controls if you test that way. And the
Yep.
problem is the attack shows up as water because it's a chemical equation. I didn't
Mhm.
do hydrogen as an attacker because I just thought it was fun to steal credentials. I stole credentials because I'm this user at this asset at this time, and I'm going
Yep.
to use those credentials to inform the next step. That's water. That's the level of
Mhm.
complexity I need to be driving in my environment. Whereas if I'm just doing these individual checklists, yeah, it's a great starting point of visibility, but you're going to quickly outgrow it. And then don't be surprised when you get wet when a breach happens.
So I mean, it is so fantastic hearing you saying that because for me, when I was doing instant response, it's always finding it's like a puzzle. It's like a complete jigsaw puzzle, and the attackers will basically they will segment, they will change their path, they will augment, they will try to look at what other things they can capture in order to stay hidden, stay stealthy. And to your point is that you shouldn't be looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework as basically a checkbox of things like we've done with other types of controls and compliance. It's about understanding about what is the path and how does it all connect and interlink. How is it all associated along? Just like we talked about earlier with security solutions, the interoperability, but the attack path is also the same approach. It's about if I have access to one thing, where can it lead to? And I think one of the things that's missing is, kind of the idea is the different paths you can go along that attack framework. If I'm here on this piece of the table, where can this take me to? And where's the possible places I could have came from to get here? And I think that'll be a great way to really bring it together to show the evolution is to have it not just as a map, but actually as a journey. What's those different journeys look like? So maybe we're not going to solve everything today, but we given definitely the MITRE ATT&CK framework guys some some food for thought for the next
Well,
revision.
you can ride a mule on your journey or you can ride a unicorn.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to bring it to a close today. I would rather be riding a unicorn rather than actually taking a mule. Because to be honest, the unicorn will be taking you, the mule you'll be dragging. It will not want to go where you're going. So but it's been fantastic having you on, and definitely the final kind of thoughts and wisdom. I think definitely the audience will get a lot of great ideas and where they can start and take a look and even kind of maybe redefine some of the things they've been doing historically to the point where they can really make significant improvements. So Bryson, it's always fantastic having you on. I can't wait the next time we catch up, and definitely we should make sure that it's not too long. And we forgot the selfie the last time. That was the one thing that
We did
we
forget
didn't
the
do.
selfie. Yes. I
Yeah,
really love
so
taking selfies with everybody that I become friends with because
hmm,
it's fun years later being able to reference these pictures. It's cool.
absolutely. And as we get older and grayer, we can always look back at those youthful
Speak
days.
for yourself.
So, I know. Oh, like, but your beard has a little gray in it,
A
doesn't
little, yeah. No, my beard is completely
it?
gray and white. Cyber Gandalf
So,
is Cyber Gandalf. Absolutely.
that's what. So that's your new nickname, is it? The Gandalf rather than Grim.
Well, the Cyber Gandalf was that character. So until I
Okay.
grow a beard again, I'm just Bryson.
Fantastic. So I'm looking forward to catching up again in the near future. We'll have to have something go because I know you're a big foodie, so we'll definitely have to have something good to eat. And again, many thanks for joining me today. I'm pretty sure the guests have had such a valuable amount of information, and I would, you are a knowledgeable person. Every time I speak to you, I learn something new. I become more knowledgeable after, and that's the whole purpose, to be honest, of these podcasts. Is that it's not just for me to bring and guests and share knowledge, but also it's a great way for us to connect and to share knowledge and for me to gain knowledge as well, and to talk to great people, great minds, and great friends. So thank you for coming on, and hopefully we'll see each other again soon. And so for the audience again, hopefully this has been valuable. What ways can people connect with you before we leave?
I
What's
think
the
I'm
best way?
very easy to find. I mean, you can type in Bryson and Unicorn, but On Twitter, I'm at Bryson Bort. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
Mm,
I don't think I'm shy or hard to find.
absolutely. Okay, I think we'll definitely make some links in the show notes for sure. Then to make it easier for people. So again, thank you for everyone. Take care. This is the 401 Access Tonight podcast. Tune in every 2 weeks, and everyone out there, stay safe, take care, and have fun. So thank you very much. All the best.